Let's introduce our next speaker now. Michelle Sleight is the author of Insight, Up Close and Personal Profile of Sexual Assault. She's written this book to bust the myths about rape and make a stand for cultural change. Her mission is to enable people to transcend the experience of being raped and live as an authentic, empowered survivor. In her book, Michelle speaks openly from a unique perspective about what it's like to be raped. She shares her struggles and her addictions and talks about how the systems and thinking in place at the moment make it impossible for many to make it back from hell to happiness. The aim of the book is not only to help victims of rape, but to also educate communities to better understand and identify sexual predators, as well as responding in a more resourceful way to sexual assault trauma. A registered coach and trauma specialist, Michelle shares her understanding, processes and knowledge that set her and her clients permanently free. To launch Insight, Up Close and Personal Profile of Sexual Assault, please welcome to the State Library of New South Wales the author, Michelle Sleight.
Hello, and thank you very much everyone for joining me here today. I am Michelle Sleight. This book, Insight, Up Close and Personal Profile, has been a long time coming. After a lifetime of trauma, this book is the culmination of not just how to survive, but it answers questions and shares how to live a fulfilled life after rape. For those who don't know me, I am an empowered survivor of 6 rapes and 1 sexual assault, beginning at the age of 5 years. I've also experienced work-related trauma and the persecution that goes with that. I've been stalked and powerless, and I've lost someone very close to me to a domestic murder. However, I am no longer a victim. And my work includes setting a 1997 New South Wales legal precedent around sexual assault and helping others to overcome their traumatic pasts and live free of trauma. And it's at this point I would like to take just a moment to celebrate all of those who are part of a very special family, my family, a family of survivors and victims who are part of a community, even though we may not know that we are. You have shown extraordinary courage, resilience, self-love and strength to wake up every day and get through each hour, minute and sometimes seconds that can seem impossible. So to you all, I congratulate you and I celebrate you. Now, a lot of what I'll be talking about is considered confronting and controversial. And rape and trauma are sensitive topics. And that's before we consider laws and policies and thinking around this topic that provide the grey areas that sexual predators thrive in. So sit with your feelings, and I promise you that you will see that you can help to change sexual assault culture. And for those brave people who are surviving, you can have a meaningful life after it. Now, whether you've experienced trauma yourself or you're trying to support somebody who has, you are not alone. And together we can change perceptions. We can change laws and we can change policies. So, speaking about laws and policies, let's talk about social workers. Now, their function has always been an advocacy bridge between community and policymakers. And in the past, they've had dialogue with the press and they've actually brought about a lot of great change within the court system. However, we have taken a step backwards. Social workers tell me that they're scared to speak up for loss of their job. They feel gagged. Now, at the moment, sexual assault is a taboo subject conversationally. It tends to appear in the media when it's a public figure or a high-profile event. And because it's not being acknowledged as an everyday event, people of all ages and sexual orientations, it's destroying their lives and it's costing their lives. And over the years, people have committed suicide because they simply cannot live with the trauma and sexual assault culture. Some have attempted it, some have succeeded to commit suicide, and this is really quite significant, at the lowest point for humanity, an overseas teenager was given permission to legally die because she could not cope with the trauma of being raped. What we need is a change in thinking and policies across the board. Universities, schools, court system, all platforms. And we need to start talking openly about these systems and policies and about our thinking and the way in which it actually enables predators to get away with rape. Now, the way that the silencing and gagging of victims and social workers is creating more damage and more pain is going to be discussed. It's time that communities develop an awareness of sexual assault and how it happens, so that it's not something that happens to someone else. We are all responsible for preventing it and speaking up about it without the risk of criminal charges, losing jobs, being blamed, or being pushed into a corner. So this book is a first step towards sharing this knowledge and explaining it clearly for those who've experienced it and for those who haven't. So essentially it's a resource about how to look at these issues and how to actually understand them and make sense of them. One of the chapters is a full biography. It incorporates the emotional aspects and the physical pain that I experienced as my body was internally assaulted while I was suffocating from the stench of the predators, how I died every time I was raped, the dysfunction, the anorexia and the bulimia, and the struggle to build a new identity without adequate support or resources, and the practical actions that I took that set me free from surviving to being an empowered survivor today. Now, when it comes to sexual assault and other life-changing trauma, it's really important to acknowledge that emotions run deep. And I've got a story to share with you to put this into perspective, because you see, things haven't changed over the last few decades. Sexual predators are still getting away with what they do, and I'll explain why after this story. So I was in a shop just talking with a teenage girl who was still within the high school system, and within the last 7 years she presented to the police station with her mother having been repeatedly sexually raped on a weekly basis by her mother's partner's brother. And the police sent her home with Mum because Mum promised not to take her back. And that very weekend, she found herself back at her mum's partner's house where the partner lived with his brother, the man who was assaulting her, and he continued to assault her again and again and again. Now, she told me that police never once investigated or charged him. They released her into Mum's care, took no further action in relation to him, and just trusted that she would be all right. And by doing nothing, they also completely neglected every other potential victim that he was assaulting at that time, and all those that he has assaulted since and into the future. And of course, she continued to be his victim. Now, that is a pretty hard story to hear, right? And the biggest question surrounding that is, why didn't the police do anything? And the simple answer to that is that we, as a society, have a culture, a way of thinking that surrounds sexual assault. But actually, that's not the answer. Because every single one of us, the police, health workers, politicians, people who've been raped, and those who haven't been raped yet, we all have our own way of thinking and own way of understanding. And even those who have been raped might not really understand the subject due to their upbringing. In my book, I profile sexual predators and give insight into how they manipulate us to get away with rape. And they do it because of our ignorance. And they rely on that and use it to keep their dirty actions in the shadows. They rely on the fact that the victim will respond in a certain way, and that society will accept the get out of jail free cards, enabling them to continue to rape and rape and rape. Now, because of our culture, fear of criticism, laws and policies that limit our conversations around sexual assault, there's a lot of misconceptions. See, people don't understand why people who have been raped behave the way they do. There's a lot of blaming the victim, which actually is really unfair because the victim is already blaming themselves. You see, people who are being sexually assaulted shut down. They cannot think consciously. They are unable to process information. And if you've never experienced it, you can never really understand how that feels. Now, through my own experiences, research and analysis, I know firsthand that conscious thinking shuts down immediately the moment shock sets in, and it happens within a split second. At that point, we no longer have conscious thought, and it becomes all about preserving life. And people who experience this go into survival mode, and they feel dead, numb, alone, absolutely shattered, while a society just expects them to pick up and carry on without a fuss. So here's another story for you. In 2010, while living in the Philippines, I went to a Halloween party, and I went to use the toilet. And a man forced the door open and he was going to rape me. Now, at the time, I didn't know that he was regularly, every weekend, raping a particular group of women and also raping women within his workplace. So, after all my years of rewiring and my thinking and all the research that I did and everything that I learned, I was calmly able to ask myself, what's the best outcome here for me? And I said to him, okay, you're here to rape me, I acknowledge that, but I want you to know that there's going to be blood, that people are going to know I didn't want this, and there's going to be evidence. And so if you're going to do it, let's have at it. In other words, I didn't respond at all the way he expected. I didn't respond like a victim, and he had no idea how to respond to me. He just stood there. He didn't know if he was in danger or what it actually meant, the way in which I had responded. However, what's most important is he didn't rape me. Now, it's important to say here that whilst my mindset gave me options, it wasn't the only factor that kept me safe, because then it's just too easy to turn around and use mindset against people who are being raped. And I'm not infallible. I am, however, extremely knowledgeable in this area, and what I share in this book just might help someone else remain safe too. What I have found is that there is a dangerous lack of understanding around the mindset and drive behind those who sexually assault. And until we understand the who, hows, and whys, we can't really begin to keep ourselves safe. So ask yourself, what if by reading this book you have the awareness to potentially avoid a dangerous situation or keep your loved ones safe? Now, another example is from a girls' sports training session where a shirtless, shoeless man walked onto a training space with girls aged from primary right through to high school. Now, at that point, I'd already made a phone call to police, while other caring, loving parents went into shock. They just shut down. But because of the personal process that I'd actually been through, I was able to function and act, while everyone else could not. It was outside their realm of taking action because they didn't have the strategies or the planning in place to deal with that sort of situation, a situation that was outside of their normal experience. So I was able to walk up to him and tell him the police are on their way, whilst putting myself between him and the girls, and he left. Now, this isn't about me being a hero. It's about learning to think consciously and planning so that you can calmly act correctly when it matters most. And this book is full of examples of people who have been confronted with situations where they don't know how to respond. And it's an insight into people's behaviour during threatening situations. And I'm hoping it will change our social perception around people who've been raped in some way or another. Now, in Australia, we are required to report a criminal offence, and sexual assault is a criminal offence. And under our system, the police are employed to investigate criminal complaints, including sexual assault, and while some do not. Now, they are also responsible for charging, and the Department of Public Prosecutions determines the charge and prosecutes in court. The victim is merely a witness. However, it falls to these people, who are often very traumatised and fragile, to hold sexual predators accountable and drive awareness in the court system. Therefore, to encourage and enable them to fulfil this role, pathways need to change. Our criminal justice system is an entity unto itself and leaves many disillusioned. Victims going to court, despite a guilty verdict, don't magically find that life becomes better. You see, it can be a powerful stepping stone if you use it correctly to your advantage, if you know how. And unless you have a clear purpose which does not include revenge, then you will come out possibly more damaged or as damaged as you are going in. There are ways of going to court, and there is a mindset of going to court. And if it's empowerment and healing you're after, then court can be an extremely powerful experience. Now, I've been working with someone who went from being an emotional annoyance to police, despite supportive evidence, to being a strong, empowered witness for the prosecutor, simply through a shift in mindset. So let's talk about sexual assault mindset and the answer to it, which is therapy. And this has been a very exceedingly difficult subject for me to package. However, it's an extremely important one. Today, I will speak about the treatments for trauma of sexual assault very simplistically. So typically, a victim can begin their therapy search from self-driven willpower. And when that doesn't work, or if they bypass that step, they usually find themselves visiting the GP, where they tend to be offered options from a boxed set of neatly packaged textbook pathways. Now, I've gone down a number of pathways that I found did not work for me, and others say they did not work for them either. And there's another complication around the success of therapy, which depends on a range of things going on in an individual's mind. So environmental influences can determine whether a particular therapy or therapies is going to be the answer at any given time. And this can require therapist flexibility. So you see, therapy is not a one-size-fits-all. And there is a whole smorgasbord of options available that aren't as widely known or funded as those we traditionally rely upon. And a lot of people don't realise they're available and what they can actually achieve. It is my experience for therapies to have an impact. They should have a structure, an outcome and a plan, which includes a time frame to actually achieve that outcome. Otherwise, for victims, it's a never-ending, painful, weekly or monthly process that looks really good on projected income balance sheets. Now, many people are exhausted from trying, and they're stretched to the point where they think, I can't go on. I can't take any more. Nothing works, and I just want it to stop. And I have been those people, and I have said those words. And I was fortunate enough to have found an answer that worked for me and has worked for others. So I stand here today And through this book and interviews, I tell all. Firstly, because as an empowered survivor, I can. I'm living proof that although we, survivors of sexual assault, can never erase the assault or the memory of it, we can live a fulfilled life free of triggers, pits of despair, and emotional rollercoaster rides. I'm also a beacon of accountability of what can be achieved to those within the mental health and therapy world. What is possible if they're committed to meeting the needs of their client individually and are prepared to sometimes work with others who can help their clients in areas where their skill set may not be effective. And I hope to encourage my survivor family to get involved and take responsibility for having expectations, for asking questions and challenging pathways that don't work for them, and be a driving force in their therapy outcomes and what they want that to look like in their lives. Now, other than making changes in the areas I've already discussed, education is a huge factor in changing sexual assault culture and outcomes for victims of trauma trying to find healthy and resourceful ways forward. And this is why I have written an extensive chapter around sexual assault education at all ages with a focus on consent. Now, so many of us incorrectly blame ourselves, right? And that is widely due to ignorance and misunderstanding in our society around sexual assault and consent. Now, I agree, you cannot teach sex education to a toddler or a young child. However, you can teach safe communication and acceptable behaviour without the emotions we as a society attach to sexual assault. And I know this because I've done it, and it has kept my children safe. Now, it is crucial that we teach our children at all ages about sexual assault as a step towards helping them and changing sexual assault culture. Now, some people believe that young children who have been raped are too young to understand what happened to them. And I'm here to tell you that's cruel, because I know it's not true. And it leaves them mentally unsafe. It leaves them traumatised in no man's land, where something physically invasive and traumatic has taken place, and they have no way of understanding it or even knowing that it wasn't their fault. And most victims, regardless of age, will bury the experience and internalise blame. Now, none of us expects to be raped because we're just not the sort of person that happens to. And when we are, we're left dead, alone, terrified and confused, with no skills or resources to cope. Not only does a person suffer the original trauma, but their entire life is affected by that event. And my book shows that by changing your mindset, you can change your life experience. Not that you can avoid trauma or that you can erase the traumatic event, but you can alter your response to it and the impact that it has on your life, giving you back control. Having been through so much trauma myself, I've evolved, so to speak. I've come out the other side. And I'm very passionate about my mission. And I am a voice that can't be silenced. I can't be sacked. Now, people can laugh at me and they can discredit me, and that's okay because that's where they're at. I am an empowered voice because I can talk in depth about what I have lived through. I can share each moment as I either was frozen, fleeing, or fighting for my life, as I died while my body was violated, torn, bruised and abused, and my mind shut down, and the rapist left me stripped of my identity and truly powerless. I know anxiety intimately. I know how it works. I know where it's rooted, and I know how to get rid of it. And I intend to be a different voice for those who want a different culture, so that they and their children can have different experiences. So I am a woman standing here today, and I am nobody special. I just believe that it's time we said enough, and we raise our voices together and we put an end to this very destructive culture around sexual assault. And I hope that within the book you can find your voice and your way forward too. And it's at this point that I invite those who feel they're silenced and those who have the power to fund and implement change to reach out if they genuinely want to change the status quo. Thank you.
Will you take questions, Michelle?
Absolutely, ask away.
Your true, authentic self was violated.
Totally.
And then you then had to create some protection for yourself going forward. Has your self changed? Are you now a new authentic self, or do we not see that? Do you still steel yourself to protect yourself?
Okay, so it's a really good question and a lot of people ask it. And here's the thing. I was 5 years old when I was first assaulted, and I have no memory of who I may have been before that happened, except my books and my pets. I can remember nothing. So I don't know who I was going to be. But I remember who I was at that point, a very confused and very disillusioned little girl who stepped forward and spoke with adults who did nothing. And then I evolved into an extremely angry little girl, and I ceased to exist really as a person. And each time that I was assaulted, that person died, and when I looked in the mirror, I didn't know who I was looking at. I didn't recognise this person because I was dead, that person over there was dead. But the thinking, the self-talk, oh my God, it's happened again, what have I done, I can't tell anyone, all the negative self-talk started creating a new person and the environment in which I was in was in some ways supportive, in other ways it wasn't, and so I started to evolve as another person. And then it would happen again, and I would look back in that mirror and I was not anybody that I could recognise. So yeah, I had to start again. I created a new me, and everything was kind of a default. There may still be inside me somewhere little bits of who I might have been. I have an extremely forward-thinking and empowered mother, very strong mother, very resilient and resourceful mother, and I think because she was a constant in my life, I was able to perhaps hold on to some of those aspects. But yeah, you die and then you reinvent yourself. It's really hard. And what happens is a lot of the time when people are assaulted, they bury it, they hate themselves, they destroy themselves internally, they don't tell anyone, and they just jump back into their routine. And so they kind of go along in this sort of dysfunctional, detached no man's land, and then bang, out of nowhere they're triggered, and then they're left, and they're reeling, and they don't know what to do or what to think, and then it all starts again. So, there's maybe bits of me, but those bits I've turned into something that sort of has got me to where I am today. So I'm not the person that I started out to be, but without what I've been through, I wouldn't be the person I am today. If I hadn't found that pathway, I wouldn't be this person. So does that answer your question?
It does, and in thinking about that, and what's bringing the tear to my eye is that, to be coarse about it, the little girl that you were has been destroyed. That little girl has been murdered.
She was murdered,
Yeah.
but she was left alive.
Yeah.
Yeah, she was roadkill. And she had, by herself, with nobody else to help her, she had to scrape up her guts and sew up the seam and keep going. Mm.
I don't want to dominate the questions here. I've got one more if anyone else wants to jump in there. You talked about how the culture in our perspective of sexual assault has to change. But it's bigger than that, surely, because the culture in how we educate our sons as to what's acceptable while they're growing up is part of it as well. Then moving into the culture of how we treat sexual assault victims, the law process, the justice process after that, it all seems to be broken to the point where you say, I just want it to go away, it's all too hard.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
the culture extends further back than just our behaviour when it comes to
Well,
assault.
it's all mixed, and this is why I've chosen these categories to talk about today. Okay, so as a victim of sexual assault, at the age of 5 or 6, my grandmother told me there are things that we talk about. Sorry, there are things that we just don't talk about, and this is one of them, okay? So that actually, in a way, was worse than being raped. That aloneness and that okay, I'm falling apart, but we don't talk about that. That culture actually really affected me. And so the way that we think is important, and it drives the way in which we actually do raise our children and interact in society. So it is a really big component. I think that it also affects the way in which we see ourselves. Like I said, no one expects to be raped, and when we are, we have this image of the people that get raped, right? The short skirts and the drunk girls or whatever. And we're suddenly thinking, oh my God, I'm that? Or people think I'm that? And, we don't want anyone to know that we're that, right? And we're not even consciously aware that we're making all these judgments, or that these judgments are actually now determining the way in which we move forward. And we whack up all these walls so that we can hide and no one can see what sort of person we are. And I call it like a chameleon effect. Because we start to sort of get on we're with this group of people, we kind of fit in with them, just so that we don't stand out. We're constantly hiding. Or we're right out there in everyone's face, but we trying to fit in to society's thinking. If society was more open about, okay, this is what happens, we're having a cuppa, and someone says, oh, Josie was sexually assaulted the other day. Like, oh, okay, which therapist has she got? Oh, okay, who was her support person? Did she get to see a doctor on time? We need to be, as a society, speaking about it, thinking about it, and more resourceful about it, teaching our children better. And I did mention in here, and I talk about it in the book, that we need to raise them to understand there is a very big difference. And I actually, in the book, talk about my first sexual experience, which was a scientific experiment. Because I knew exactly what rape was, but I didn't know what sex was. And here I am, this teenage kid, and I have no understanding what anyone's talking about and what all the fuss is about. And I couldn't put sexual assault into context because it was a sexual experience, but it wasn't what other people were talking about. Right? So if we educate about what sex is, what sexual assault is, and then what consent is, and really understand those core things as something that we're raised with, without emotion or judgment, then we as a society can be more supportive, and people who are assaulted can not start going, oh, I'm this hideous thing. Why didn't I do this? Why didn't I do that? And this constant feeling of dirty that they carry around, they can have a different experience. So definitely societal mindset is very important. Definitely education is very, very important. Now for me, you'll read in the book, every time that I went to police, except the last time, I was turned away. And that still happens today. And it's deterred me it deterred me for the other assaults to go back because I knew it was a door that was shut. I didn't see it as an option. So my ability to reach out was shut down. So we really need, there's a number of things that go on within the court system and the justice system that need to be rethought, given that if we don't come forward and we don't press charges, nothing's going to be really changing in terms of the fact that we won't realise just how bad it really is. You know, I say to people, oh, you know, this chap that pled guilty to raping me in 1997. Now, at the time that he raped me, he told my witness he had raped more women than he could count on his fingers and toes. And you know what? He's probably still doing that. So how many women does he get to rape before we as a society say, hey, we don't want people committing suicide because of it. We don't want people, you know, having these experiences, or if they do, let's be sort of like supportive so that they've got somewhere to go. They've got resources that are going to meet their, you know, where they're at in their story. And let's have an approachable, specialised unit to deal with them within the criminal justice system. We can't change the basics. You've got to be innocent until proven guilty. But there's a lot of things that we can do better to get these people to come forward and report it and become a statistic, right? Because if you're not a statistic, you're an unknown and the problem's not that bad, and why should the government be spending money on it when it's really not that bad? Does that answer your question?
Michelle, thank you very much for this afternoon.
Yeah.
My pleasure.
I want to say thank you for writing this book, Michelle. That's an incredibly generous and important thing that you've done.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'm very proud to have
Please thank
you.
Michelle, everyone.
Thank you for being here today. It's been great.